Thank you for being here today to participate in our session. So I put in the chat to, feel free to use the chat as a way to engage with one another. I have a few poll questions throughout the session so that you can respond to the polls in chat. And also you can use that to ask questions. And I'll try and keep an eye on that and look to respond to those as they come in or when it seems like appropriate in the session. And I'll take some breaks throughout, and then also there'll be plenty of time at the end for some Q&A. And so you got the rundown of me. The gist is I spend my day doing assessment and quality assurance work for my institution, and then I also work on behalf of a couple organizations and nonprofits to encourage assessment work. So you heard about me. I'd love to hear about you all and know who is in the audience and who's here watching the session. So feel free to use the chat to describe your role. Are you an administrator, an assessment professional, a faculty member, a graduate student, staff member, or other? And I'll just give a little time for folks to respond, just so that helps me have an idea who I'm presenting to. And as I think about examples and to relate to the audience, it's good to know that. And I understand you might also check a couple of these boxes. I myself am an administrator, assessment professional, and a faculty member, and a staff member, oddly enough. So I understand how that can be. We often wear many hats. Okay. Well, feel free to continue to use the chat to share and engage as we look to go through here. But I will look to dive right in. So you may have seen these phrases in terms of invitations for your feedback, or asking for you to take this short survey, and they may seem all too familiar. So my question to you is, think about how often you get surveyed. That could be at work, internal feedback for your university, for your institution, for your department. It can also be external feedback, right? So a professional organization or the field or a colleague or research could be going on. And through your work capacity, your professional capacity, you could be invited to survey and engage in some external surveys. Outside of work, you can also be receiving surveys. You can get them when you're shopping, at home, in your neighborhood, in your community. When you're getting a service done, the provider or the vendor may ask for feedback and ask for you to complete a survey. So this may be how you feel when you get a survey invitation, or your eyes might roll, or you might be frustrated. And so what's really important is to think about, if this is how you feel, how do you think our students feel? Right? So an element that I'm going to come back to a lot in this presentation is putting yourself in the shoes of the student and the recipient of a survey, and thinking about what you would want from the experience or from the invitation, and applying that same logic to our students. I would also say that, before I go any further, a psychometric principle of measurement is to first determine what it is you're going to measure, and then determine the best way to measure it. And we're really going to focus on that second piece, specifically to say that you first need to identify the most appropriate data collection method according to your needs. Far too often, the knee-jerk reaction or automatic response that folks have is to, if they need to collect data, they're going to create or use a survey, like this guy, just swinging away whenever a ball is put in front of him. And I want to reiterate, it is not a foregone conclusion that survey is the way to collect data. There are many ways to collect data, so many ways. Survey methodology is just one. So I want to preface that because I know this session is all about survey methodology and how to increase your response rates. But I want to first say that you shouldn't even be digging into this unless survey methodology is the best approach for you. And honestly, I lean towards and collect data in so many other ways, and far more often in other ways than I do surveys. So I want to make sure and make that point because I think surveys are, in a good way, they are very approachable, easy to understand. People are not super intimidated by them and feel like they can make them. There's also a lot of free systems and tools and services you can use to build and administer surveys. So it seems like a very easy option, but we need to remember that measuring something because it's easy puts then the intent of the measure as not the primary purpose, right? So if we're trying to assess for student learning, but we're doing what's easiest, well, then now student learning is second to convenience, and that shouldn't be the case. So I want to make sure and state that, and I'm more than happy to entertain conversations, especially later in the Q&A, about some other good assessment methods and ways that you could potentially swap out surveys for other data collection tools if you feel like you are doing too many surveys. But putting that blanket statement out there. And so from now on, the rest of this session, we are assuming that survey is the most appropriate method for what we're trying to do. And so if that's the case, we're going to dig into some tips and tricks that'll help increase our response rate. So I have these pieces, these tips broken down into several categories to help compartmentalize and group this information. So hopefully that's helpful. And I'll reiterate and go through all the categories at the end. But as we go, we'll take it section by section. And I know this is a 2-hour, it's slated to be a 2-hour workshop or session. I'll build in a little break in about the midway point. Likewise, happy to take questions as they come up. But again, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. But let's first dig into the first 7 tips, which all relate to intentional survey design. So first, determine what data you already have. I can't tell you how many times people will be looking to do a survey and will start to ask questions or include questions, and then I'll ask them, but wait, don't we already have that information? Why do you need to ask them to give it to you in the survey if we already have it? A good example is a lot of survey tools have the ability to collect identity. And so if you enable that ability and send out the survey and have it attached to somebody's email address, to the email address you send it to, then you don't need to ask them for their name, their email. And depending on, especially if we're talking about students, as long as you can connect that email address to your student information system, you really don't need to ask any information from the student about their, identity or their major, because if you have their email, you should be able to connect that to your student information system and pull all of that data. So very important to first think about what data you already have and not then ask for that data again in a survey, especially because there's things like a student may forget or misunderstand the question and give wrong information that doesn't match their true identity for a simple error or mistake on their end, and then that can throw off your whole data, especially if you're trying to validate things with the data that you have. Item number 2, only ask necessary questions. So toss out the nice to know questions or questions that you can't pinpoint a specific use for their data. A great exercise for this is take your instrument and go question by question and articulate how you're going to use that data, how that data you're collecting is going to answer a question you have, fulfill a need, inform a decision you're making, or that it's a necessary question to help filter or get to another data point. But if you can't do that, if you only have a question because like, oh, we thought this would be nice to include, or it seems related, then it's probably not a needed question. And so don't include it, cut it out. Put demographic questions at the end of the survey. So research has shown that these sorts of questions are quick and easy to fill out and don't take a lot of effort. So it's nice to put them at the end of the survey as the student is kind of winding down from their survey experience to close things out. And you know they'll answer those last few questions because they're really easy, versus putting them in the beginning. Because if you put them in the beginning, it can delay getting to the point of the survey. So the student might be told and informed that this is a survey about their experience in the classroom. And then first it's asking about like, well, what year are you? And what's, your sex or your gender? And they might be like, well, when are we going to get to me talking about my class experience? So the only exception to that is if you need a demographic question for skip logic purposes. So maybe, again, there's a survey about the class experience, but maybe you had, as a faculty member, maybe you had two classes, one that was fully online and one that was in person, and you're sending the same survey to both populations. Well, maybe your first question is, were you in the online class or were you in the in-person class? And then based on their answer, they get the respective questions for those experiences. Although arguably, if you have different questions, you might maybe do separate surveys anyway, but that's a reason why you might put a demographic question earlier in the survey. And to that end, I highly encourage using survey or skip logic or conditional responses to ask response-based questions. By doing this, students will only see or receive relevant questions and not have to select not applicable or does not apply when we know it wouldn't apply for them. So an example could be, you might be asking third or fourth year students, you might be sending a survey to your entire student body, and you might want to only gear questions about employment or future employment and job preparation to students that are about to graduate. And so then you don't want to ask those questions to students who just started their higher education experience, right? Because that might be far away for them and they might not have appropriate responses. So if we know a question isn't going to apply to a certain population, rather than asking them to say not applicable or does not apply, if we know that, use conditional based questions to filter that out, to make that survey shorter for them and make sure every person is only getting the questions that apply to them. Now, there are some instances where you can't do, you don't know, right? Like maybe you're asking somebody about their participation in an orientation event and you don't know which all sessions they went to. So you might have to ask, well, what sessions did you go to? Or ask about questions. But what you could do is, instead of saying something like rate the quality of every session and having them have to say not applicable, you could first say, what sessions did you go to? And they answer, and then you only give them follow-up questions for those specific sessions. Okay. The next element is pilot your instrument, which is important. I'll get to that in a moment, but pilot it specifically with students. If your survey is going to students, make sure they're involved. You may think your questions make sense and the language you're using is appropriate, but since you're not the targeted survey taker, get their feedback, share it with them, with your intended audience, and check with them to see if they understand the question that's being asked, if they understand the instructions, if they understand the language. Use their feedback then to adjust your instrument accordingly. Because again, everything might make sense to you. You're the one putting it together, but you're not the one taking it, right? So check in with the people who would be taking it and make sure that the instrument is going to be understood by them. Now, I would also say it's important as part of the piloting process to test your instrument, test the functionality, the administration method. It's always disappointing to launch a survey and then 2 weeks later you go to check the results and find out a question was worded wrong. You didn't include a certain response option, and so you're getting a lot of emails, or people are choosing a wrong response because they meant to put a different one. Or The skip logic and the conditional response aspects to the survey aren't working like they're supposed to. And so then you have students who are getting questions that they shouldn't be getting, which can ultimately skew and mess up your data. By testing and piloting the instrument in advance, you can catch those errors before sending out your survey for real. Likewise, if you want to do something like, oh, I want to customize the invitation to say the person's name or indicate some other aspect that'll be filled in based on information I'm using to administer the survey, you can test that with yourself or with some colleagues and some test data before you launch it to, say, a large population, and then find out that that functionality isn't working. And tip number 7, make your survey accessible. This is important for ability needs, as well as recognizing that students may respond to your survey request from different devices. So think about, if you're delivering an electronic survey, think about, is this going to work on a computer? Is it going to work on a tablet? Is it going to work on a phone? Because if it's a link, the student might access it from any of those options. And so a lot of software, thankfully, does some automatic consolidation of that and optimization for the device that it's going to be on. But still, that's an aspect that you can pilot and check in advance, as well as when you're thinking about your questions. That's something you can think about as well. Of if you know your student population and know that they're on their phones a lot or likely to engage with this on a phone or a tablet, as opposed to a computer or a laptop, you may not want to have a lot of open-ended, long response questions, because they might not want to take the time to sit and type that all out on a phone or tablet. On a keyboard, it might be easy for them to do, but maybe not so on a phone. So again, think about that accessibility component, as well as making sure your survey questions, the language, the colors you're using meet accessibility needs. Okay, so we're going to move on from the designing, intentional design component to then talk about invitations, which I've covered a little bit, but I'm going to get a lot more specific here with about 10 different tips. Again, feel free to chime in the chat if you have any questions about the previous section, or even questions to anticipate, and I will look to get those as we go. But survey invitations. First of all, mind your timing. So I know sometimes that it can be easy to fit assessment in when you have time. But again, think about your audience, right? Just because the winter or the summer might be a slower time for you and a better time when you can be sending a survey instrument and doing the assessment work, maybe that doesn't work well for students. And if they're the ones you are collecting the data from, you need to cater to their schedule. So think about your academic calendar, think about student schedules, think about student attention patterns, right? So this is also about not only timing in terms of time of year, but also thinking like day of the week, time of the day, right? Do you think your students are going to respond to a survey first thing in the morning, maybe midday around lunch, or at the end of the day? Consider those things when you send it out. And your students, or you have a better idea given your student culture than I would. So think about what is going to relate well and fit your students. And with that, think too about, in addition to what's going to meet your needs and when you're launching your survey, think about the student experience from a perspective of other surveys. And so this is where it's really helpful for institutions to coordinate and be aware of survey activity going on across the institution, because you might not want, maybe everybody knows that the month of October is a good time for students because they're in the middle of their term and they're kind of settled in, but they're not near the end of the term, so they're not stressed yet. So maybe it's a good time to survey. But if everybody knows that and everybody tries to survey them at the same time, it's not going to go over well. So think intentionally and try to coordinate as an institution around when surveys should launch. And inevitably, you may not be able to eliminate all possible surveys being independent. There's inevitably going to be some overlap, but try to minimize that or be very intentional with then who you're surveying so that all the same students are not getting all the surveys all of the time. Another thing you can do is think about having a cycle of communication for the administration of your survey. Do a pre-announcement. So avoid sending an email invitation for a survey out of the blue. Do a pre-announcement explaining the what, why, and when of a survey to your students. That way, when you send your actual announcement, it's not going to be a surprise. And if they happen to ignore the pre-announcement, then when they get the actual announcement, potentially from the same email address or with a similar messaging, they might go, huh, I saw that first message and didn't look at it, but now I got it again or got a related one. Maybe I should look at this. And then follow up, right? So send follow-up messages and reminders to encourage response, right? So if you haven't taken time yet, like the survey is going to end in a week, we value your opinion, please take it now, here's the link again. But also follow up at the end of your survey to thank your students. Thank them for their attention, their participation. A good thing that you can do at that time is to also potentially share some results or implications, or say, like, as a result of this feedback, this department's going to meet, this area is going to get together, or we've already determined a couple actions we're going to take. But doing that is a great way to communicate that the data is being looked at, and that student voice matters, and that the time that they took to share was worthwhile. And it also signals, even if the people didn't do the survey and didn't participate, it shows that maybe they should have, because again, the results are being looked at, voices are being heard, change is happening because of student feedback. So it can also buy you some goodwill for the future. Now, with survey reminders and follow-ups, try when you can to only send those reminders to non-respondents. So the good news is a lot of survey technology has an option like that, where you can send out a survey to everyone, and then because it's collecting unique identifiers per respondent, you can send a reminder that'll only go to people who have not responded. And that's great, because if you send reminders just to everybody, well, let's say the survey is over the course of 3 weeks. Maybe you're collecting data over 3 weeks. You send the survey and somebody fills it out on day 1. And then 2 weeks go by and they get this reminder and they think, huh, did I fill out that survey 2 weeks ago? Because again, maybe they're getting a lot of surveys. Maybe they don't remember if they filled out this one or not. And so maybe they fill it out again, and then you have duplicate data. And that's not something you want. So again, where possible, only send reminders to non-respondents. Another thing too is that some survey providers, when you do administer a survey by email, it can send unique links so that you can also have a setting included to prevent somebody from using the link more than once. And so that's another option too, to help prevent, so that if reminders did go to people more than once, that if they clicked it, it would tell them like, hey, we already got your response, so you don't need to respond again. And I mentioned a little of this before with the piloting example, but where possible, personalize your invitations, right? So address students by name in the invitation, and share how their perspective is relevant or important to your data collection. Really help signal to them why this is important, why you're inviting them personally. And that can go a long way. It can let people know that, again, this was intended for them and that their voice is going to matter, and that it can make them feel special, that this feedback is going to be important and is needed from them. Next, use the invitation to motivate interest. So again, as we think about the messages we're sending to pre-announce the survey, use language to generate curiosity, empower students' voices, and increase their desire to engage. For example, a survey about a campus-wide event could stress the desire to allocate resources for relevant activities that are aligned with student interests, right? To say, like, we want to invite this speaker, we want to invite this entertainer, but we want to do that based on your interests, right? Or we have X amount of money. Do you all want us to put all that towards one event, one really big event, or towards multiple smaller events? Please help us make this decision because we want it to best align with your interests and what you're willing to engage in. And so then if they know, like, oh, this is something I'm interested in, or this is something I want to do, or I have a voice in trying to determine this, they may be more likely to participate, right? Likewise, by inviting and encouraging them to respond, you can also be reiterating the fact that we're trying to capture diverse perspectives. We know the student body is not a monolith. We know there are lots of opinions, lots of interests, lots of preferences. So we want to try and get accurate representation and fair representation of those diverse perspectives. So we need multiple people to respond. So don't just rely on maybe your friend taking the survey, or don't just assume somebody else is going to fill this out. You're being invited. We want you to respond. As part of the invitation, talk about how the data is going to be used. So beyond talking about why you're collecting the data, talk about specifically why it's important and how you're going to take this data and bring about change, or what you're going to do with this information. So as people give you their feedback, again, like, you're going to take this to determine how we allocate resources, how we plan events, how we schedule events, whatever that might be clear so that they know this is why it's important for you to give us your feedback, because these are the things we're going to do. You're going to see the direct impact of your voice on these decisions. And along those lines, explain how you'll handle the data. So in the one sense, talk about how you're handling the data to make decisions and in a data-informed way. But this is also about the idea of confidentiality, anonymity. And I want to take a moment to talk about those two things separately, because they are different things. So confidentiality is the aspect of telling the respondent that their data and their responses will be held and only shared and viewed and used by relevant decision makers and people that are involved in this initiative and who have a necessary interest in seeing this information and using it for the intended purpose of the survey. Anonymity is saying that there is no way to connect somebody's response to their identity. Now, it's possible that those two things can be both in existence and being used as part of your methodology. You could be saying, we are only going to use these results confidentially. We're only going to share them with this specific research team and us only. And all of the responses are anonymous, so they're not connected to any identity, so we don't know who says what. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes, especially with something like, again, I alluded to, a lot of survey technology can allow you to send responses to only non-respondents. Or if you send a survey by email, it can automatically capture the email address. If you do something like that, you've lost anonymity because now identity is tagged and tied to their responses. Now, you could still be treating their data confidentially, but you couldn't say that the results will be anonymous. Now, I will say, I have encountered some survey tools that do allow for that type of sophistication of unique links and only sending reminders to non-respondents, but then the company or the survey provider on their end blocks that identity. Like if you ask them to see the raw data or you want to get your results, they will, even though they needed to have that identifier of, say, the person's email address to send to, and to know not to send reminders to them because they already responded, they will withhold that information and then provide you just with the anonymous data, as long as that's, you know, something you wanted or an aspect of your methodology. That's not always the case. That's not the most common aspect to survey providers and survey technology. So definitely look into those things, especially if those are aspects of your methodology or things that you are promising to your respondents. But very important to be clear with that component, especially around any data collection that's very sensitive or personal, because if you're not assuring them, you know, about their identity being connected things, or with the confidentiality, or even, you know, how the data is going to be used, then they may not be likely to participate, or they may participate, but they may not be as honest or forthcoming as they might if they knew more about your process and what you were looking to do. So very important component. And those two concepts often get conflated or confused with one another, and they're not the same. Now, as I said, they can both apply, right, to an approach, but very different things. It's also important, again, this is still all in the invitation that you're sending out about the survey. Talk to them about completion time and be realistic. So again, some survey technology have built-in pilots or features that will tell you this should take about 5 minutes, about 10 minutes. If it doesn't, then again, pilot with the student and time them. Time and see how long it takes them to go through your survey. Because it's important to give that estimate in the invitation so that people know what to expect, and that transparency can help them best plan for potentially taking the survey. If they know it's a 2-question survey and it'll take them maybe 30 seconds, then as they're between classes or as they see it on their phone, they may be likely to just complete it right there. But especially if they're in transit or, you know, just using their phone and they see this thing, if you're not clear about that and they think it's just a 2-question survey, it might only take 30 seconds, then they open it up and it's actually like a 30-question survey and it would really take 15 minutes. Well, then they might start taking your survey and then bail, and they might not complete. And then you have partial responses that you may not be able to use, and that can also further damage the trust and the likelihood that they might engage in a survey in the future, because they might think, oh, all surveys are always really long. So the more transparent you can be, the better. And it can, like I said, help them plan intentionally. I know for me, if I know a survey is super short, then yeah, maybe once I get it, as long as I have a few moments, I'll take it right there. But if people tell me like this survey is going to take about 20 minutes for you to complete, if it's something that I, you know, have a vested interest in completing, I will then appropriately allot time and maybe say like, yeah, you know, right now I can't do this, but maybe this afternoon I'll have time, or maybe tomorrow morning I have a block of time that I can sit and actually dedicate to completing this. Now, when I don't know how long it's going to be, then sometimes I don't know if I'm going to participate, because when I get the invitation, I may be busy, or and you know, again, the language in the invitation may not be super clear, and so these are things to think about. People may have their own standards about what information they need in order to then participate. So don't leave things to question. Be as transparent as you can to help encourage then engagement. I highly recommend, where you can, to include data in your invitations. So this is a great way to generate interest, engage your readers, and offer more than just text. So you can share data. You could write about past, again, keeping with this like event example, write about past students' dissatisfaction with how events were scheduled. And so then that, after we got this feedback from students, that led to us creating more convenient future offerings. Or, you know, feedback last year was that we wanted to have a course where students could meet individually with the instructor once a week, and that really helped them stay on track. And so because of that, we not only expanded that and made that the typical protocol for this course, but we applied it across our entire program. So by sharing that information, again, it will engage students. It can show them that you used past data and made changes, which can then buy this goodwill or psychologically encourage them to participate now because they already know that you use data, you listen to student voice. And so here's then their opportunity to give their voice and be part of the future change, be part of the future improvements that are going to be made. So again, this is a great way to reiterate that you're using past data and showing that indeed you're going to use their data should they participate. And if we're following, earlier tips, then this is also a great thing for you to follow up on your final follow-up survey or thank you survey to them to show, and these are the results that people shared, or these are the things that we're going to do with your results to just further reinforce, thank you for trusting us and giving us your voice, and we are looking at the data, and here's where we're going from here. Another thing to look to do, if possible, sometimes it's not always possible, but more and more survey technologies are allowing you to embed the first question of your survey in your email invitation. And so the way this looks is you have your email text of the various things in your invitation, and then instead of a hyperlink or a button that takes them to the survey, the actual first question of the survey is right there. And so to the student, it almost appears like this is a one-question survey, right? And that you're telling them you want their feedback, you're telling them how you're going to use the data, and then they see the first question right there. So then they answer it, and the survey captures that answer, but then launches them into the survey. Now, hopefully you've conveyed to them how long the survey might be, so they're not then surprised if it opens up and says, they've answered one of 30 questions. But it's a great way to automatically just start the process, right? And take away the mystery of what the survey is going to look like or what it's about by you just told them, and now here's the first question, just easing them right into that process. Now, again, that's not something that is possible with all survey technology. And so then a side consideration for all of this is really evaluate the technology you're using. And not all survey providers are equal. Now, that being said, you don't always need all the bells and whistles and all the features that some providers can offer versus others, but you really want to think about the practices and the tools and the functionality that you need, and compare, for price point and ease of integration and use, and how many users you can have and your budget. But really be intentional in thinking about the survey technology you're using for considerations like this and others, right? The whole skip logic and conditional response component. Some survey tools don't allow that, or like the free version they have doesn't allow that. So then it's important for your institution to invest in at least some paid user accounts to allow for those aspects of surveying. Okay, 2 sections down, about to move into the third. Reminder to chime in the chat if you have any questions, and haven't seen any pop up yet, so I'm going to keep going, but hopefully that just means folks are digesting and taking all this information in and thinking of how it can apply for their practice. And what I would say is after this section, I was going to pause and take a couple minute break to let people stretch, let people use the restroom if they need, grab a snack, but just have a little bit of a break from the me talking at you, and allow you to sit and think and reflect and just take a little break. So know that that's coming. Obviously, you can take a break now if you need to, but I just want to telegraph that after this chunk of a section, that's what we'll do, because we'll be about approximately halfway through. All right, engaging students. So very important, again, and this is all this is based off of the assumption of we're engaging students. If your audience are not students, just swap out students and put in your audience, and all of these tips still apply. But get their take on what their needs are. So far too often, we are assuming what students need, what they might like. And so what better way to inform your strategic priorities than to get student input? So despite how much you think you know what's best or pressing, it helps to hear directly from them. Now, maybe you've done the study, or maybe you have the behavioral data that will inform you, but please, please, please don't just set a survey agenda based off of your thoughts, your perceptions, your needs. Make sure to consider their feedback, right? So, right now there's a lot of pressing issues and trauma for students in their personal lives, their professional lives, academia. I'm not sure how it is in the rest of the world, but I know in the US there are very real questions and multiple entities, the public, government, external quality assurance agencies that truly can question the value of higher education or the return on your investment. And are you going to truly get the benefits of this? Is it truly going to help you get a job or help you learn the things that you want to learn? So in the face of that, there are a lot of perceived priorities, or given that information, institutions can take from that what they think is most pressing, or the opportunity to grow or respond. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we can look to larger data or data that is not specific to our institution and just assume that's happening at our institution, or take the experiences of other students or the needs of other people, and because we're in the same industry or same business of serving students, assume that that's equally happening and equally happening in that intensity and in that priority at our institution. And maybe that's the case, but we can answer that question by actually talking and engaging with our students. Now, we can do that with the background of this is what's happening, internationally, nationally, in our region. Do you think that's accurate of what's happening, here at our institution? But very important to engage them as collaborators in the process. And again, that I touched on this even earlier, of engaging them as, to help pilot and review your survey. But this is another way that, as you're thinking about assessment, or as you're thinking about survey strategy, they're a great population to talk to, because they're your intended population to respond to. So much like the timing component, and even like what language they might like to see, talk to them about, like, okay, if we were going to have to choose and prioritize like 5 surveys to do this year, what would those topics be? We were thinking they'd be this. Do you agree, or do you think there'd be other priorities? So they've already been alluding, be sure to include students. Another way to do that is in the design process. So they can be great collaborators in designing your instrument. They can help provide question language. They can help give you feedback on tone, terminology. They can also comment on anticipated student experiences. They can tell you, like, oh, if you make this a check all that apply, or a single choice option, or versus an essay, this is probably likely to get more responses. Or if you word it this way, you might appeal to these students, or you might get students thinking about X, Y, or Z. So really pilot a survey. Piloting a survey once it's built is one thing, and we talked about that, and that matters, and that's important. But again, Not all students are the same or think alike, nor does the intent of students in the design always clearly shine through. So the more students we can be engaging and involving in the process and including them in multiple parts of the process, design, review, and I'll talk later about analysis, the better, because then we're truly centering students and being more student focused in the process by having them actually involved, as opposed to being an administrator or a faculty member or an assessment professional and just using what we know or the indirect feedback about student behaviors and preferences versus hearing from them directly. And a nice benefit too in having students involved in the design is if they know this is being created and being pushed and they have connections or are part of the population that might receive this survey, they can talk it up. They can help with your promotion and they can tell other students about it. And that, that can again be a nice byproduct and increase your response rate. Along those lines, talk to students about administration advice, right? So do your homework to present to them the different options, which I've covered a lot of them, and also covered the nuance of, you could it's not just an email invitation, but it's an email invitation that then can send reminders only to non-respondents, right? So make sure to clarify to them the benefits of these things. So they might say, oh, I'd rather get a text message. And maybe they would, but maybe you can't do the follow-up reminders to non-respondents when administering via text message versus email. And if you tell them that, maybe they would say, well, knowing that, given the pros and cons, I'd rather receive it by email then and get the reminders than a one-time text that if I don't have time to take it, I'm not going to click on it. So again, present them the options, be transparent, and you truly value their feedback and weigh it in relation to what is feasible and what you're capable of doing. Ask about, in addition to how it's sent, like text or email, what email it comes from, right? So I say this all the time. If we have a certain survey, maybe I'm building it with a certain department and it's ready to launch and they say, great, can you send it for me? And I say, well, do you really think it's going to get the best response coming from me and my name? Your students don't know me, right? And they don't know, what assessment means or what my title means, and they don't recognize my name. They recognize your name, right? If you're a faculty member, they're your students. So we should try to make the survey come from you. And that's another feature of a lot of survey technology. It can mask, or you can cover the survey tool default email and at least have it say like a person's name, even though then it'll say like afterwards the actual company email, because email technology is also very advanced and can tell if there's a mismatch between somebody's name and an email address. But again, that's another thing to talk to students about, is who should this survey come from? What name should we be using? Should it be from the faculty member, or does it matter if it comes from maybe the program chair or director or the dean of the college, right? Does the level of who it's coming from matter? Will students appreciate that the dean or the president cares and is involved in this survey? Or would they rather have it more personalized from the individual they know? Talk to them, get their feedback. And it may depend by topic, right? So again, that's why it's important to have them as collaborators and regularly get their feedback on your survey needs. And they can also inform if you're doing, think too about marketing campaigns. So beyond the invitation, maybe they'll say, hey, this sounds really important. Or when you're trying to launch the survey, we're going to be really busy with X, Y, or Z. And so it could help to have a promotion beyond just the email and beyond just like pre-announcements, but maybe you should put flyers around campus, or maybe, there should be this marketing campaign that very intentionally throughout the year is promoting and talking about this initiative and why we're going to need this data, and help then seed the pre-announcement, as well as then follow up with yes and thank you for participating and here's the results, and then later here are the changes we've made. And there's this consistent arc of this marketing campaign around this effort. Students would tell you if that kind of thing would resonate with them or be appropriate given the survey or the topic. So again, look to get their feedback on those components too. And where you can, and hopefully you can, I know I've worked at many institutions and know this is possible in a number of ways, but integrate with your student systems. So use your learning management system, use a student engagement platform, and a website that you might be using to promote or increase access of your survey to students. All of those can be mechanisms to embed or launch surveys. Think about where the student traffic is, where their digital footprint is, where they're likely to click on things and respond and engage, and where their eyes go to, and then cater to that digital domain, right? So don't just rely, and again, there's always pros and cons, but this is where you need to think about not just relying on email, right, to administer a survey, especially if you know, like every day they're logging into the learning management system for class, or every day they're logging into the student engagement platform to see what's going on campus or when events are happening. So use those student systems to your advantage with your surveying. And invite student interpretation of results. So I alluded to this earlier, but just as they have valuable perspectives on strategy and design, they can offer brilliant observations and interpretation for the results. You might be looking at the response from students and seeing a disconnect, right? But having students there, they might be able to help interpret or connect the dots. Now, maybe they're just as confused as you are, but if we don't have them present, we would never know. And we wouldn't have that additional positionality and perspective to help add flavor to the response. Involving them also reinforces that their voices are being heard, right? They will see, the people that are participating there will see and know that you are looking at the data because they can give a firsthand account of that. And if you're communicating that students are going to be involved in that, that could be another incentive for people to participate, knowing that future students are going to look at these results. And again, this can just further encourage future peer-to-peer promotion and motivation to participate in surveys if they see the intentionality of involving students in the process and looking at student feedback. And the last piece of this section is share your results with students. So you be sure to re-engage your students once the data is analyzed, share the results with them, and even better, announce the improvements that you plan to make based on the survey findings. And obviously you can do this with the participants and the people you invited to engage in the survey. You can also do this broader. If these changes and improvements or results are pertinent to a larger part of the student body, tell them, share it to a larger amount, or share it with all the students if that's appropriate. But again, be intentional with a big part of using data is sharing it, right? That's step number one, because then maybe students are going to use the data, right? Or maybe other people in your institutional community can use this information as well. But if you never share it, they won't have it. And you can even go back to point number one of they may not know this data is collected because nobody's sharing or talking about it. So sharing is important for a lot of reasons, but specifically sharing it with students is valuable because it, again, just reiterates that students are not just the subject of our study, right? They're not just people that are providing us data and we're not just taking from them, but that we are also sharing and giving back to them and letting them see the insights that are being gained from this process as well. So I'm going to deliver on my promise to give a couple-minute break here, but I do want to leave you with this reflection question. So for folks who maybe don't need to take a break, you can just think about this question and think about what your response would be to it. But consider your own survey activity. And given that, which of these options best describes how often you involve students in the surveys that you conduct? Is it 0 to 20%, so not much at all? 21 to 40%, some of the time? 40 to 60%, about half the time? 61 to 80%, majority of the time? Or 81 to 100, which is nearly all the time? So think about that. I will mute my line so you have some silence to reflect in, or so that you can also take a break without hearing sounds from me as a potential distraction, and we will reconvene in 3 or 4 minutes. Feel free to use the chat to share any questions, comments, or thoughts, or even your response to the question. But I will mute myself, get a drink of water, and we'll start back up in a few moments. Thanks. All right. Hopefully folks enjoyed a little break there. I enjoyed a nice glass of water. And hopefully folks had an opportunity to reflect on the question here. I'm not seeing any questions or concerns sort of noted in the chat, so I'm going to look to move forward and keep going here. But again, feel free to chime in the chat, and we will go from there. All right. So the next section is engaging faculty and staff. So the first thing is when you're looking to do your surveys and engage faculty and staff, make sure you're clear about the purpose or the value, right? So don't go through this process alone. If you're collecting data on behalf of one or multiple offices, invite those people to be part of the process. Make them aware of what's going on. We shouldn't be developing surveys as individuals on our own in a silo, right? Like, if we're doing it on behalf of an entire office, at least announce to that office that you're doing this. Now, maybe nobody else has time to do it, or maybe it's your job to be the main person putting this together, but you should still communicate to others that we are doing this and this is why we're doing it, this is how we're doing it, because you'd be surprised how people might want to chime in or offer feedback to be part of the process, or also just add perspectives. Get leadership to talk about surveys, right? Leadership involvement signals importance. Include their voices, invite their presence, and leverage their perspectives in your process. Especially if, with the previous one, like, you want to engage more faculty and staff, but you feel like nobody listens. So you can invite leadership, and leadership can help signal that people should listen, or people should be invested, or should be looking to collaborate or partner here. All right, the next is share survey literature and resources. I think it's really important, as we're doing this work, to have these on hand, right? So that what good practice looks like, and that you can share it with other people so that they understand and recognize that this isn't just your will or your thoughts of what good survey design is, but that actually literature and research shows this is the way to do things, or this is the credibility or the value of survey methodology. James Madison University actually has some really great instrument design information that covers psychometric properties like validity, reliability, illustrates how surveys can be designed with the utmost integrity. Resources like these can help equip, prepare, and build competence for folks to know more about and engage in the process. So certainly look to share those resources if you have them, and if you don't have them, look to collect them so that you can share them. And I'm just going to do a quick check because I got a message from one of the other moderators. Is there anything going on or anything I need to address? Musa or Cyan? No? Okay. We will continue along. So another thing to do as your survey is collecting data is to watch and report on response rates. So sharing response rates with staff can help keep them updated on the data collection process. Plus, this data can be used to generate group and individual conversations on what is or isn't working with survey creation, promotion, and invitations. So again, there's another aspect of engaging your other employees of not just the purpose of the survey, but as it's being deployed, letting them know, like, here's how it's being received. This is what responses are looking like. This is what early data looks like. It can help pique their interest and then be invested and want to be part of then the eventual analysis process. To that end, make assessment a regular topic in your meetings. I can't stress this enough that it is easily can be a standing agenda item. Even if you're only doing one survey a year, you can discuss your data needs and your priorities, the purpose, content considerations, the design process, and review before it launches. And I should pause and say that all those topics could be discussed at separate meetings, right? Because if you're talking about your data needs and your priorities, that might be a whole conversation unto itself. And then you might need to take that, sit with it, update your design or your considerations for the survey, and then come back, right? And give an update to the team about those pieces. And then as you do the design process and review it and look for people to pilot it, that can be a whole other, right? So we had this earlier conversation about what our needs are, what the content should look like. Well, here it is. Here it's built. Look it over. Give us feedback. And then as you look to administer it, you could tell them what you've heard from students about the best ways to administer it, and you can share that feedback. And then as it's administered, you can give the response rates and what early data collection looks like, and see, get people's reactions on that. When you are finally done with the data administration, you are looking to analyze the data, you can have a conversation about what the analysis looks like. And obviously that's a separate meeting and later than these other pieces of the process. And you should have the discussion of analyzing the data and then have a separate discussion of how you're sharing the results. You can share it with them, but then also talk about the different people and parts of the institution and community members that you're going to be sharing these results with as well, so they're aware. Because then they might be in another meeting, another setting, and someone might bring it up because they had the results shared with them, and they at least know. And they were like, oh, right, yeah, I knew that survey was going on. I knew you all were going to get that information. They're not caught off guard. You can also then talk to them about identifying actions to be taken, right? So these are the results. These are the implications. We've shared it with these people. We're thinking about taking these certain actions, making these certain changes. When should we do that? Who wants to be involved? What should that look like? That could potentially be multiple meetings. And then you could have a conversation about planning for future data needs. So all of this is for one survey. Maybe we need more surveys, or maybe we need to do this survey again next year, or maybe we need to do a different survey again next year. And so there's a conversation point. Or maybe the conversation is about how we need to do something other than a survey going forward. So again, the process, the life of a survey can easily span multiple meetings and multiple time periods for a department, so that it could be a regular topic. And so it should be. And that can also help keep people engaged and interested in the process. Another way to keep them interested is to celebrate your results, right? So reinforce the relevance and importance of the data collected and answering questions you had, or providing essential information about your services, or also the insights you gain about student learning, right? And this can even just be a big deal to celebrate a stellar response rate, or celebrate that we executed on this data collection effort, right? I mean, this maybe is your department's first major survey, or maybe it's a really important survey and you just want to acknowledge the people working on it, or what the results said, or that, you know, we completed this and now we're moving on to another initiative. But it can matter a lot to the people involved, and again, to signal the importance of this if you're recognizing and celebrating the effort. So, you know, I put the question up before about consider how often you're involving students in your survey efforts. I would pose the same question, but now for faculty and staff beyond your area. So we're going to assume that other faculty and staff within your department are involved in your survey. We're going to assume that. So now think about what faculty or staff beyond your area, how often do you engage them in your survey efforts? Would it be that 0 to 20%, 21 to 40%, 41 to 60, 61 to 80, or 81 to 100? So think about that. And feel free to respond in the chat too. If you want to share your possible response. Okay. So we've alluded to this a little bit, but I want to really drive home this idea of using the results. So we talked about before, discuss results with students. Doing this reiterates that they're stakeholders and not just the subject of our study. Discuss results with faculty and staff. You know, not everyone's going to be part of the survey process, so share this broadly but intentionally. Do it for awareness, as well as to open the door for collaboration regarding data implications. Use data to inform decision making. So when designed well, as we talked about one of the first slides, each survey question is hopefully providing answers to essential questions, and these data points have implications to improve your programs and services. Okay. Review your results for validity. Check that the questions that are gathering data and the anticipated data satisfy those needs, those objectives, what you were hoping that the survey would accomplish, and the data you were hoping to get. See if that's the case, because then you'll want to consider any changes you need to make for future surveys, which is a nice, easy, almost automatic, data-informed decision that you can make. Use the results to inform your future assessment plan. So, I mean, we just talked about how you can use these results. So beyond future surveys, consider if the results you've obtained from the survey necessitate a follow-up, either a follow-up survey, maybe a focus group to get more of the qualitative narrative of what's going on or why, or some other measure, right? But surveys can often lead to new or different questions, and then you may need to collect further data to learn more about a particular issue or outcome. And leverage in marketing and messaging to students, right? So beyond informing future assessment efforts, results and actions for improvement can be used as part of marketing campaigns, or even just marketing to get the name of your program and your services out there. When students know that programs are based on student collected interests or have been improved based on past student feedback, they may be more likely to engage. Or maybe this sharing of results is the aspect that captures their interest or cuts through the noise of other departments and services and courses they could be taking, but that this is what's unique and this is what differentiates, this intervention from another. So all sorts of benefits to sharing there. And our final section or chunk of tips is investing resources. So I talked about this a little bit before, but make sure to set aside time for the entire life of the survey. Remember, a survey is more than just design and data collection. So you don't just want to think, oh, it'll take me an hour to build this survey and then 20 minutes to set up the administration and send the email. No, you have to factor in the time to plan, design, pilot, and test, do any revisions, actually do the administration, allow time for your data to collect, right? So just because you build it and send it doesn't mean the data collection is immediate. So factor in how long the data is collecting, build in time for you to analyze the data, to write and author your report, to put together an action plan based on the results. And to remember too, given all the tips before, that you should be including other people in this process. And so again, this isn't just how fast can you build a survey, how fast can you do the analysis, but you're working with other people and including other perspectives. But by setting aside appropriate time for the life of your survey and planning that out, you'll likely be able to engage and involve students or otherwise best execute the survey experience to garner optimal participation and results, right? So if we're setting aside this time intentionally, then if in 2 months, that's when you're going to be doing your hardcore analysis or action planning based on the results, then you can tell other faculty and staff, hey, 2 months from now, come to this meeting and let's engage and talk about this and I'll have all these results. And maybe then they can set aside the time too, as opposed to an in the moment, hey, can you do this with me right now? And they haven't built this into their schedule. Cluster your assessments. This is an idea. So some institutions have incredible success coordinating with leadership to arrange for assessment days where there's no classes, but students and employees are asked to engage in various assessment activities all day. So what this does is it focuses the majority of the data collection in one time period, but it can encourage participation with the promise of this one day you're going to do a lot of surveys, but that's all the surveys you're going to get, or that's going to be the majority of the surveys you get for the entire year, right? And that can also help with the coordination or the timing and when to do things throughout the year. So it's something to consider. Again, a number of institutions have had success doing something like that, either like one full day, half days, like twice a year, whatever it might be, whatever might work for your culture. Some folks say that that wouldn't work for us at all, right? Like we have better luck and better response rates doing, the intentionally planned data collection throughout the year, but it's something to think about. If it makes sense, consider leveraging a captive audience. So don't forget that for survey data, you can capture data in real time and you can carve out time for students to complete your survey while participating in your event, your program, your class. So it doesn't always have to be a survey, an email or a survey sent to them after the fact. But again, it depends on the data you're trying to collect, the purpose of it, as well as, do you have the time to leverage them within the given intervention? Brand your invitations and instruments. So take time to think of the color, the logo, the message you intend to convey. So there's some consistency of surveys that students experience. It can be simple. Again, consistency in colors, font, survey names or naming conventions, the tone of the email invitations and instructions can go a long way. Offer incentives for participation. You can consider incentives for standalone surveys or a reward program, right? So maybe they're going to get 10 surveys throughout the year. So you tell them, if you do at least 8 of them, you'll get your name, put in this drawing for a prize. Now, the only thing with incentives is be aware that some incentives can attract people who only want the prize. So they might inauthentically or inaccurately respond to things or rush through them in order just to get the prize. So be aware of that, and perhaps only offer incentives for big or critical surveys, because if you do offer incentives all the time, it could also then water down and make the request less desirable. And lastly, and I've alluded to this a little bit before, but consider paying for technology and allocating resources for it. There are indeed a number of free tools and software that are available, but you usually have to pay to access all the features, things like skip logic, non-respondent reminders, invitation personalization, custom coding, or robust reporting. So think about it. I guess it always depends on the complexity and scope and amount of surveys you're doing, but it's likely going to be something you need to invest in. So do your homework and try and pick technology that's going to best fit, and advocate to invest there. So I want to help recap, because we ran through 41 different things. It's a lot of information, but I want to help centralize some of those themes and put these in big buckets for some big takeaway considerations. So here we go. First and foremost, engage and involve students. I talked about that a lot, and to evidence it, here we can see that obviously the student engagement area, those tips 18 to 23 directly talked about ways to do it, but we also talked about it in intentional design, number 5, which is pilot your instrument with students, using the results, number 30, which is discuss results with students, and leverage a captive audience in investing resources. So engage your students. Collaborate with faculty and staff, right? So clearly there was section 24 through 29 about that, but also in the intentional design, we talked about determine what data you have. That's a way to talk to other faculty and staff, of making sure they also, whether they know if this data exists. Number 6, test instrument functionality, use other faculty and staff to help with that. Number 8, for survey invitations, mind survey timing. So talk to other faculty and staff when they're launching their surveys, or what other considerations to keep in mind. In using the results, discuss the results of faculty and staff, number 31. Number 32, use data to inform decisions. Involve faculty and staff to help inform how to use the data. Number 34, results inform assessment plans. Leveraging other faculty and staff to help you put together future assessment plans. In the investing resources, set aside time for the life of the survey. So as I alluded, tell other faculty and staff and allow them to help inform, like, maybe you thought you could do the results immediately once you do the analysis immediately once you get the results, but you find out that other faculty and staff, if you waited 2 weeks, they'd be available or willing to help out. So I'd say it's worth pushing back 2 weeks so that to get more people involved in that process. Be intentional in your design and administration. So this hit everywhere. The first 2 sections for sure about intentional design and survey invitations, but then also these other areas, right? The student engagement, getting students take on the survey needs, that's 18, 19, including them in the design, 20, asking for their administration advice, 24, discussing survey purpose, 26, share survey literature. So again, that goes to the intentional design component. Using the results, informing assessment plans, leveraging marketing and messaging, and setting aside time for the life of the survey, kind of rounds those out. And overuse and overshare your results. I'm telling you right now, I've never been anywhere, and I've consulted and worked with over 150 institutions, getting closer to 200. And I'm telling you, I've never been anywhere where I have decidedly said, you all share your results too much, or you talk about your results too much, or you are too data informed. Never seen that. So my advice is you should plan in your head to feel like I should feel like I'm doing way too much here. I should feel like when I'm done sharing this, people are going to be sick of hearing about this survey. Because if that's what you're doing, you're probably then delivering enough of the sharing, because then you're probably going to at least saturate enough and touch enough people that they will be aware of what you're doing. But again, this was everywhere. There were two specific sections in green there where we were talking about use, but it also comes back to a number of other tips we've already talked about. Determining the data you already have, testing the instrument, talking about how data will be used, explaining how you'll handle the data, inviting students to interpret the results, sharing results with students, getting leadership to talk up the surveys, making an assessment a regular topic, celebrating the results, and again, setting aside time for the life of the survey. So I want you all to think about, given all of this, I'm going to quick kind of put it up on the screen so it helps here. But which tips, really resonated for you the most? And there were a lot, I know, but and I'm going to put it up on a screen here just to help you see. Whoop. All right. So here we go. Of course, I copied it and then it blanked on me. There we go. So these were the big categories, in case you weren't keeping track. But intentional design, survey invitations, student engagement, engaging faculty and staff, using the resources, and investing resources. Now, one of the things that I also have available for folks is a reflection Jamboard. And I'll put it in the chat. So here's the link. I put it in the chat. I also put it in like the Zoom room chat in like the larger lobby area, specifically for this session. But I put it in the chat to everybody. I know it's a little funky link, but at least it's short. So I'll leave this up for just a moment longer, and then I'll show you actually what it is. But really, Jamboard is just a free tool and platform that you can use to brainstorm and collaborate and share information and capture notes. And I made this one specifically for this session. It will live on well beyond after the session, so you can go back to it, you can engage with it after this session's over, which is nice because you can use it for your own notes, or as other people are putting information in there, you can engage with them. But let me pull that up. So here's what it looks like when you open it up. And again, I just have a couple pages where it's, how you use the information for today. Here's the intentional design section, or where you can put comments related to that, survey invitations, student engagement. And these are just those high level categories. And then this is just a blank space if people want to write other notes. But the way it works, if you're not familiar with Jamboard, is you can, if you want, you can write text. You just click on this over here, and then you can start writing. And once you do, you can then edit that. You can duplicate it in case you want to write multiple comments, and the little box will just keep expanding for how much you want to write. You can also, if you go over here and click the sticky note, you can make a sticky note, and you can write what you want. You can choose a color. And when you save it, it'll automatically kind of prompt another one, but you can always just click cancel to be done. And then it'll automatically place somewhere, and then you can drag it around. So maybe I think, survey designs is where we want to go. And once that's there, you can either click over here to do another sticky note, or once there's one that's available, you can click duplicate, and then you can take the one that you duplicated and you can just edit it. And then you can say, like, this is also of importance. And if you can keep the same color if you want, you can give a different color. Then again, you have this, another thing that you can put wherever you want. If you think it's kind of related to that other one, you can keep it near it. But again, this can serve as a nice, easy space to brainstorm, write your own thoughts, your own reflections, and as other people reflect, it's a space that you can see what they're thinking about, what their thoughts are. But what I really want to encourage people to do is to use this as a way to think about, again, how you're going to use this information. So not just that, oh, this was important or this was helpful, but what are you going to do now? Knowing what you know, knowing that I shared 7 tips about intentional design, how are you going to use those as you approach survey design? Knowing that we talked about student engagement, what are the ways that you are going to engage students in surveying going forward? Right? So this is a great space. And again, because it could be a lot of information, a lot to take in, a lot to focus on. I'm not saying like comment everywhere, but allow this to be, I would challenge you to take at least one topic, one area, and think about what's 1 or 2 things that I will look to go back and change with my behavior at my institution, with my survey practice. And jot it down here to share it with other people. Jot it down to remind yourself. But what's nice is, the link I shared, like you have the same amount of editing access as I do. So be careful, because if you delete a sticky note or move something around, it's going to move it around or delete it for everybody. But the other good thing is that you can really, engage as you see fit. Here's a text box in case people want to copy one of these. And also, like when you do these things, you can change the type, the size too, right? So that's a little too small. And you can change the color if you want. Hey, I'm going to make this green or blue. And then same thing like the sticky notes. If you want to duplicate it, you can. Then you can move these around. But it's pretty user-friendly and pretty free-flowing in terms of you can use it as you see fit. And again, if you don't like my prompt, or if you don't like the style of it or want more space, you can go to this page, and actually, if you keep going, it'll just create new pages. So so if you want to make one page all your own, you can, and you can even put a little background on it and make it your own. But again, know that this Jamboard is dedicated for this session, and I made it for you all to use. So feel free to use it. And again, the link is going to be good until, I don't know, forever. So I'll probably check on this later in the conference, and maybe a couple weeks after the conference, and see what people might have put in there. But otherwise, feel free to use it again as your note-taking space and reflection point, and maybe to learn from other folks. Another thing I wanted to share by way of resource, and I'll put this in the chats as well, is a blog. And the blog is actually largely the content I presented here. So hopefully that's not disappointing to people. But to show you what it is, it's the blog that actually kind of inspired this presentation, where it's all this content, but just in narrative form. So, obviously in the presentation, just to go back, like a lot of this stuff I talked about, right? I didn't tell you, you don't see written some of the nuance and detail for each of these things. Even here, it's like, yeah, what was number 7 or what was 18, or so that you don't have to remember that. This blog has it all laid out for you, right? So the 41 ways, and starts with a little intro, and then it goes into intentional design 1 through 7, right? Just like we covered today. Then goes into the next section and goes all the way, down to 41, right? So it's just another reference for this information, another way to share it with other people, because maybe you thought this was really helpful information, or you want to really hone in on certain pieces. Like, well, now you have a nice concise thing that you can just copy and paste or share, whatever that information is useful or helpful for you. But I wanted to be sure and share the link for that, so that you have access to that as well, just to help accommodate folks who might be more likely to maybe read this than like listen to a presentation or look through a PowerPoint. So those are those things. Last, I wanted to share just my contact information. Feel free. I have benefited greatly from people before me who have volunteered their time and energy and willingness to engage in conversations or share resources. It helps. I still benefit greatly from that with people in the field. So, I'm a lifelong learner and try to help others in the same space. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions about this or other assessment things. I'd be more than happy to try and help out, or also steer you to smarter or more experienced people than me, and other resources that you can leverage that could be useful or helpful. But I want to make sure and share that information so that you all have it, and say that feel free to engage and connect. Yeah, that's what I had planned for you all today. I had cushioned for maybe some Q&A along the way. That's why I'm finishing a little early. But as I said, plenty of time here now for questions folks might have, whether it's again related to this or other things. Happy to field those as well while I'm here and have the time. But otherwise, I thank you all for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed the content, and I hope this is helpful. It was sad. Yeah, I can't. I see you moving your lips, but I can't hear you. I still can't hear you. Sorry, I don't know if you can type or chat your question or response.
Can you hear me, Joe?
Yes.
Yeah. Still no questions available actually. We'll wait 1 or 2 minutes if there is any, as we have time.
I'm sorry?
As we have time, we'll wait 1 or 2 minutes more for questions. Still no questions available.
Yeah. Yeah, happy if we still got some time, but also want to give people a break too. you hung in for an hour and a half here, so.
Yeah. Let me have a reflection of this session. In this session, Dr. Joe has presented 41 tips for improving the response of the survey. I'm happy to inform you all that we are in the Global Virtual Summit 2022, organized by International Network for Outcome-Based Education. We are in the first track of Humanity and Social Sciences. The theme is the theme for the session is the second theme, that is organizational change, mitigating limitations for capacity building. The title of the Dr. Joe was tips and tricks to increase the survey response. He has given 41 tips to increase the survey. It's not a joke. Just for a survey, giving 41 tips, and that's why he has divided the tips into different categories, like the design, survey invitation, students engagement, faculty engagement, using the results, and investigating the resources. That was awesome, Joe.
Great. Glad.
As a moderator, I have learned a lot from you. That was very useful for the researchers, the students, and the faculty who are doing their postdoctorates and doctorates. Even for the industrialists also, it will be very useful.
Great. Yeah. And that's the hope. That it's useful information and can help improve folks' practice.
Very useful information, and you have surveyed more than nearly 200 institutions. You have served for nearly 200 institutions. That's very great.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been fortunate to have been in a position to collaborate and work with a lot of schools, which is just really cool to then see assessment and certain data practices play out in a lot of different ways, a lot of different institutional types, a lot of different students and cultures, and it just only further excites me and energizes me about the work.
And the tips what you have given, that will surely give the outcome as a result. The students who are surveying, the researchers who are surveying, will be surveying with some objective. as an outcome.
That's great.
Yeah. So what you do?
Right.
Shall we end the session or wait for some time?
Well, I think we might be able to wrap it up because we gave some time for folks to talk, ask any questions or chime in, and we haven't gotten anything, so that maybe they're just equally pleased and have plenty to reflect upon and digest.
Yeah. As I see, there is no questions available there. So I think we should wrap up.
Okay.
Yeah. So on behalf of Lord's Institute of Engineering and Technology, I, Dr. Syed Hamid Mojib, thanks Dr. Joe D. Levy, speaker of the today's session, with the title Tips and Tricks to Increase the Survey Response in the theme organizational. Yeah, in the theme organizational change, mitigating limitations for capacity building. That means the first track, humanities and social sciences. This is being organized by International Network for Outcome-Based Education, the Global Virtual Summit 2022. I thank Dr. Joe. I thank all the audience. I thank the Institute of Engineering Technology, and my special thanks to International Network for Outcome-Based Education for organizing this wonderful event.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the summit.